Elara May Caldwell stood beneath the whitewashed arch of the chapel, her veil quivering in the morning breeze. A baby was nestled in her left arm, and a bouquet, now wilting, drooped in her right. The pews were crammed with townsfolk pretending to whisper, but openly staring. Her gown, borrowed and adjusted at the waist, had once belonged to a woman twice her age, and her shoes pinched with every step. But it wasn't the tight shoes or the judging gazes that made her tremble. It was the silence. Arthur Blackwood was late, a full 30 minutes late. The Reverend cleared his throat, murmuring, "Would you like to sit, child?" Elara shook her head. Leo stirred against her chest, cooing softly, completely unaware of the tension filling the room. She looked to the double doors again, hoping for footsteps, an apology, anything. But they remained shut. Not a wisp of dust in sight, no horse tied outside. Arthur was gone. She knew it then. Not ill, not delayed, not kidnapped. Gone. The whispers intensified. "I told you he'd never marry her. Carrying another man's baby, no less. Blackwood's father would never have allowed it." Elara's cheeks flushed crimson, but she didn't cry. She descended from the altar slowly, each footfall echoing through the judgmental quiet like a gunshot. The Reverend reached out to stop her, but she moved past him. The doors groaned as she pushed them open, the sunlight harsh and blinding. Outside, the town square blurred before her eyes. She didn't run. She walked, each step heavy, Leo's weight grounding her to the world that had just abandoned her. As she crossed the dusty street, someone snorted. Another woman muttered, "Serves her right." The blacksmith's apprentice let out a laugh. Elara's vision swam, but her grip on her baby never loosened. She reached the water trough, bent as if to catch her breath, but her knees buckled. Her head spun, her arms tightened around Leo just as the sky tilted, and she collapsed against the earth, her veil snagging on a broken fence post. The world dimmed, but before it vanished completely, a shadow fell over her. A man knelt beside her, his boots worn, his voice low. "Mom, are you all right?" She blinked. He was unfamiliar, broad-shouldered, dust-covered, with eyes like quiet thunder. He saw Leo first, then her. He didn't stare, didn't scoff. He simply reached for her arm and said, "Let's get you out of the street." And for the first time that day, someone looked at her without shame. Elara awoke on a hay-strewn cot inside the livery stable, the scent of horses and saddle oil wrapping around her like a blanket of rough comfort. Leo was still in her arms, fussing softly, and when she shifted to sit up, a strong hand reached out to steady her. "Easy now," the stranger said, his voice low and warm as campfire ash. He offered her a canteen. "You took quite a fall." She sipped, the water trembling on her lips. "Are you from town?" she asked, her throat raw. "No," he replied, "just passing through. Clayton Ridge." He tipped his hat once, then knelt to tend the small fire smouldering near the stable wall. "You've got a fever starting, and the baby's hungry too. Can you keep him close while I find some milk?" Elara blinked. A man who didn't ask questions, who didn't flinch at a woman collapsed with a baby in her arms and a wedding veil twisted in her skirt. "I'll feed him," she said quickly. Just don't leave." Clayton nodded once and sat back. Won't, if you don't want me to. She nursed Leo in silence, listening to the rustle of hay and distant town voices. They said it was foolish, a wedding with no ring and no father to claim the child, but I thought he loved me. Clayton didn't ask who. He only said, "Some men speak loudest when they're walking away." Her lip trembled. Everyone watched me fall, Clayton, and no one moved, not even the preacher. They've got no hearts, just habits, he said. A woman stands with a baby at an altar, and they see shame. I see someone stronger than every man in that chapel combined. Her eyes met his then, soft and uncertain. Why'd you help me? Clayton stood and tossed another log on the fire. Because someone should have helped my wife once, and I didn't get there in time. Elara's breath hitched. She died? He gave the faintest nod. With our daughter. I was 3 hours too late. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Two scars recognizing one another. Elara leaned back, brushing a strand of hair from Leo's face. I don't know what to do now, she admitted. Clayton sat beside her. You rest. You feed that boy. You grieve if you need. But you don't go back out there alone. She looked at him, unsure if she should trust kindness so freely given. Why? He met her gaze, steady and sure. Because I remember what it looks like when the world gives up on someone, and I ain't letting it happen again. By morning, the town had already rewritten her story. The chapel whispers had become drawling tales of a runaway bride with a bastard baby, who fainted in the street and was picked up by a drifter. I thought I'd be buried there alone, but maybe that ain't how it ends. Her throat tightened. You're offering me land? He met her eyes. I'm offering you my name. I'm offering Leo a roof. And I'm not asking for love, Elara. Just the chance to give something back I never could before. She stared at him, stunned by the stillness in his offer. No desperation, no pity, just truth. You don't know me, she whispered. You don't know what I've done. Clayton sat back slowly. You stood in a dress too tight, holding a child, while the whole town waited to see you fall. And when you did, you cradled that boy like the world hadn't broken you yet. That's all I need to know. Silence held them. Outside, the wind kicked up dust through the slats. Inside, Elara felt something shift in her chest. Not safety, not hope, not yet, but something close. If I say yes, she asked, what changes? You get my name, my roof, my protection. He paused, then added gently, and no one takes you from me unless I stop breathing. She looked down at Leo, who gripped her thumb with tiny fingers like he already knew the answer. Her voice trembled. I don't want to be rescued. Then don't be, Clayton said. Be chosen. And in that moment, with no ring and no roses, Elara nodded once, because it was the first time in her life someone had offered her not escape, but a beginning. They didn't announce it. No music, no crowd, just Reverend Crane standing under the awning behind the chapel, Bible in one hand and eyes full of apology. Clayton wore the same dust-covered coat, his hat removed out of respect. Elara stood barefoot, holding Leo in a borrowed blanket. her wedding dress traded for a simple brown skirt and the courage to show up anyway. "Are you sure?" the Reverend asked Clayton gently. "Ain't nobody pressuring you?" Clayton answered without flinching. "Ain't nobody ever needed to." The vows were short, honest. Reverend Crane didn't embellish. He looked at Elara when he said the words, "for better or worse," and his voice almost broke. When it was done, he didn't say, "You may kiss the bride." He said, "You may begin again." And somehow that felt like more. Clayton reached for her hand, not her waist, not her shoulder, just her hand. A simple, steady grip like an oath made flesh. They signed the record book behind the chapel, in the same room where she'd waited for Arthur. This time there was no nervous laughter, just silence and a baby cooing in his sleep. As they walked back towards the livery, heads turned, not in shock but in confusion. No one had expected her to recover. No one had expected Clayton. Back at the stable, Clayton packed a saddlebag with beans, coffee, and spare linens. "We'll ride out at dusk," he said. "Avoid too many eyes." Elara nodded, wrapping Leo close and gathering the few things she owned: half a comb, a book with no cover, a bonnet she no longer had use for. As the sun sank low, they left the town without ceremony. Just a man, a woman, and a child, riding west with nothing but silence behind them. They made camp near a creek by midnight. Clayton built the fire. Elara fed Leo, her fingers trembling only once. "I don't know how to be someone's wife," she said quietly. Clayton stared into the flames. "Then don't be. Just be Elara. That's plenty." She smiled, tired and soft. "And you? What do I call you now?" He looked at her, one corner of his mouth tugging upward. "Call me home, if that's what we're building." Under the stars, with the baby asleep between them, Elara lay on the cold ground beside a stranger who had become her promise. And for the first time since the chapel, she didn't dream of leaving. They were nearly to Stone Ridge when the rider caught up, hooves pounding hard and arrogantly, dust curling behind him like a snake. Clayton slowed his horse and reached for his rifle, eyes narrowing. Elara turned in the saddle, Leo bundled against her chest, and felt her breath catch as Arthur Blackwood reined in with a showman's grin and a polished coat unsuited for trail dust. "There you are," he said, as if she'd simply wandered off with the groceries. "Took some time to find you." Clayton stepped between them before Elara could speak, his voice like dry thunder. "You're not welcome." Arthur ignored him, his eyes locked on Elara like he still owned the right. "You married him?" he asked, a smirk curling. "After I left you at the altar?" Elara sat straighter. "You didn't leave. You ran." Arthur chuckled. "Call it what you want, but I had to think long and hard before coming back. My father's furious, said I made the family look weak, but if you come home now, I'll fix it. He'll pay the preacher double." Clayton's knuckles whitened. "You offering her like a trade mule?" Arthur shrugged. "I made a mistake. She's got my son." "He's not yours," Clayton cut in. "You gave up that right when you let her collapse in the street while you hid behind your father's title." Elara's voice didn't shake. "Leo is mine, and I'd rather raise him in a shack with a man who listens than in a mansion with a coward." Arthur's eyes darkened. "Think you're safe because you've got some dirt-stained gunman beside you." He reached into his coat. Clayton raised his rifle before Arthur could blink. "Try it," he said flatly. "But understand this. I've already buried more than you'll ever scare." Arthur's hand froze. Elara stepped forward, no longer behind anyone. "You gave me shame and silence. You gave me peace and a place to stand. So ride back to your father's parlor and tell him I'm not part of his ledger anymore." Arthur looked at her, like he was seeing someone else entirely. A woman who didn't flinch. A mother who wouldn't trade her worth for security. "Fine," he spat. but don't come crying when he turns out like you." He rode off before anyone could answer. Silence fell, heavy, and full of breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Clayton lowered the rifle. Elara looked at him, her chin high. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head. "You didn't need saving, just backing up." And with that they rode on, toward a future no one could steal. Stone Ridge wasn't marked on most maps, just a rise of pine along a split creek. One old cabin leaning against the wind, and the kind of quiet that made even memories whisper. Clayton helped Elara down from the horse, then reached for Leo with practiced hands, holding the baby close like something sacred. "It's not much," he said, nodding toward the cabin. "But the roof holds and the well's clean." Elara stepped inside and stood still. The place smelled of cedar, ash, and thyme. Of a man who had once loved, lost, and kept everything tidy anyway. There were 2 chairs, a cot, and a fireplace with stacked kindling already waiting. No pictures, no lace, but there was a carved wooden horse on the shelf, and a cradle built by hand but never used. "This was hers," Elara whispered, brushing her fingers across the cradle's edge. Clayton nodded once. "Never got the chance to rock it." She turned. "Are you sure you want us in this space?" His eyes didn't leave hers. "You didn't ruin anything. You filled it." That night they unpacked. Slowly. Elara folded clothes she barely owned into drawers that had never been used. Clayton cooked beans and cornbread over the fire, and Leo gurgled happily on a blanket nearby. When Clayton handed her a plate, she took it without a word, then quietly reached for his hand.
"You built all this?" she asked. "Every board?"
"With my own hands," he said. "Didn't think I'd be building for anyone else." She smiled softly. "You were, you just didn't know who yet." After supper, they sat on the porch in the dark, listening to the coyotes sing somewhere in the far hills. Clayton rocked slowly in the old chair, Leo nestled against his chest, tiny hand gripping a fold of his shirt. Elara wrapped her shawl tighter and looked at the land, rugged, untamed, but steady. "I've never had a place where no one knew my shame," she said quietly. "Then let this be it," Clayton answered. "Let this be where your name means only what you choose." She looked at him. This quiet cowboy who didn't try to fix her, didn't ask her to forget, only offered space beside him and meant it. "What if I don't know what to build?" she asked. He shifted Leo gently in his arms and whispered, "Then we build slow." That night, Elara lay beside him in the same bed where his past once slept. But it didn't feel like she was replacing anyone. It felt like she'd finally been invited into something honest. And for the first time, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was home. The letter arrived 3 weeks later, carried by a ranch hand who looked too nervous to meet Clayton's eyes. It bore the wax seal of the Blackwood family, thick, red, and arrogant, like everything they touched. Clayton opened it slow, scanning the ornate handwriting, while Elara rocked Leo on the porch. "What does it say?" she asked. He hesitated, then read aloud. "Miss Caldwell remains under the legal accusation of abandonment of promise and moral injury to our family name. If she does not return to Plainsbury voluntarily, proceedings will begin for the custody of the child and the retrieval of debts owed." Elara froze. "They want Leo." Clayton folded the letter with steady hands and dropped it into the fire pit. "They won't have him. Or you." She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "They're using the law now, not just shame. Law built on money and fear," Clayton muttered. Not justice. The next day they rode into town, together. Elara wore her shawl over her shoulders, chin high. Clayton wore his silence like armor. People stared as they tethered their horse near the post office. Murmurs floated like smoke. That's the girl who got left. Thought she ran off with a ranch hand. That's Blackwood's bastard, ain't it? Elara stepped into the general store anyway. She bought flour, soap, thread. She didn't meet their eyes, but she didn't hide. The storekeep, Mrs. Abbott, paused before ringing the purchase. I heard they're coming for your baby. He's not theirs to take, Elara said. He's mine. A beat of silence passed. Then Mrs. Abbott slid the goods forward. Well, if you need milk next week, I can set some aside. Just say so. Outside, Clayton was tightening the saddle when a deputy strolled up. That letter they sent, it's got legs. Might be a judge here in a week. Clayton didn't blink. He's welcome to try, but if he puts a hand on that boy, you better come with a coffin. The deputy raised a brow, but didn't argue. As they rode out, a few townsfolk watched with different eyes. Eyes that weren't so sure. Eyes that wondered what kind of woman walked back into judgment and left standing taller. That night, Elara sat beside the fire with Leo asleep in her lap. They'll never stop, will they? She whispered. Clayton looked at her, then kissed her forehead. No, but neither will we. And in that quiet, with the world gathering its stones again, Elara smiled, because for once she had something stronger than fear. She had someone who'd stand beside her, no matter what. The judge came on a Tuesday, his wagon polished, his collar stiff, and his eyes narrowed before he even stepped onto Stone Ridge soil. Behind him trailed two Blackwood men in matching suits, their boots too clean for ranch dust, and a folded decree tucked in one's vest like a loaded pistol. Elara stood on the porch with Leo in her arms and Clayton by her side. She didn't tremble. Not this time. The judge didn't introduce himself, just unfolded the document and said, By order of Plainsbury County, I'm here to retrieve the child for the family of Arthur Blackwood, pending a moral guardianship petition. Clayton stepped down first, voice low and flint-edged. You'll need more than ink and arrogance to cross this porch. One of the Blackwood men snorted. You think a shack in the woods and a marriage made in pity makes you a father? Elara stepped forward then, her voice cutting through the air. He's more of a father in one sunrise than your name's been in a lifetime. Leo was never yours. You abandoned us both. The judge lifted a brow. You admit to having the child out of wedlock? I admit to surviving a man who left me bleeding in public with a baby in my arms. If that's a crime, write it down. The Blackwood men bristled. You think the law bends for dirt-worn women and drifters? The judge hesitated. The Blackwood name carried weight, but not proof. Not out here. Just then Reverend Crane rode up fast on horseback, dust in his beard, a book under his arm. Your Honor, he called, dismounting, you'll want to see the marriage license. Signed, stamped, witness dated 1 day after your Blackwood boy disappeared. He handed the paper over. The judge took it, read. His expression cracked slightly. This complicates things, he muttered. No, Elara said calmly. It ends things. The judge folded the license and turned. Without evidence of abuse or neglect and with a legal marriage recorded, the child remains with his mother. This matter is closed unless challenged in court. One Blackwood man spat in the dirt. The other cursed, but they followed the judge without another word. As the wagon pulled away, Clayton wrapped an arm around Elara's shoulders. She exhaled, slow and deep, and whispered, That was the first time the law stood with me. Clayton kissed the crown of her head. It won't be the last. Not while I'm breathing. And Leo slept on, cradled in the arms of a family no name could buy or break. The wind was softer the morning Leo laughed, not a coo or a gurgle, but a real round-bellied giggle that startled Elara so much she dropped the washcloth into the basin. She turned to see him sitting on Clayton's knee, tiny fists waving, face tilted back toward the sky, mouth wide with delight. Clayton blinked, frozen, like he'd been caught mid-prayer. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not the polite, measured grin he gave strangers, or the quiet nods he used when words failed. This was full and rare, a smile that belonged to a man whose ribs had once forgotten how to lift without pain. "He's laughing," Elara whispered, wiping her hands and walking over barefoot. "At what?" Clayton looked down, still stunned. "At nothing. At everything. I was just bouncing him a little." Leo squealed again, tiny lungs bursting with a sound neither of them had ever earned before. Elara knelt, kissed the baby's cheek, and then, unable to help it, began to cry. "It's the first time," she said, wiping at her eyes. "He's never—" "I know," Clayton whispered. "I heard." She leaned into Clayton's side, resting her head against his shoulder as Leo calmed, his tiny body warm against their joined arms. "Do you ever think," she began slowly, "that maybe we weren't meant to find each other, but that we needed to?" Clayton's voice was low. "Every day." Afterward, Elara baked cornbread for the first time in weeks.